Well, hello there. Welcome to Bedtime Stories. I am Senorita Mendez III. I'm a cat, a very wise cat. Even if I do say so myself. And I've been told that you wish to hear about a day in my perfect life. Every day is absolutely magnificent. How could it not be? Although being the empress of the two-legged and four-legged creatures. Yes, empress. And that's how you shall call me, is no easy task, and I have to be a responsible owner for my silly human pet. I have a vast territory all to myself, and I can take a nap whenever I want. Except right now, since you've worked so hard to get an appointment with me. I was told that you were practically begging my silly human pet, which is understandable, as I am quite the busy cat. How about I tell you about yesterday evening? Let's see. It was a pleasantly curious evening. A cool, gentle breeze went through the room. I remained curled up by the warmth of my human. Although my eyes were open, the evening breeze sifted through my fur once again. The open window next to me was not only the source of the chill, but also the source of some familiar, yet rather curious sounds. I could hear nearly everything outside with just one upturned ear. Yes, my ears were very sharp. The sounds were neighborly, but you could never be sure. My ears caught the familiar chirps of sparrows. They heard the soft buzzing of the electric pole outside the window, and the sound of the bicycles in the distance. They heard some humans with their brisk footsteps and rhythmic breaths. Someone sure was enjoying their exercise. And then they heard a soft pit-pat, pit-pat that they recognized instantly, for they heard that sound whenever I went. It was the pit-pat, pit-pat of a four-legged creature like myself, taking its human out for an evening walk. I would do that too, were my human not so lazy. Pit-pat, pit-pat. The sound had begun to die down when I idly wondered, was it a dog, a cat, or something else? Curious, how curious. I was so filled with curiosity that I sat up. Then I stretched. One long big front bow which began at my hips, through the arch of my spine, up my chest, twisting down my front legs all the way to my paws. Then another long stretch. This one started at my tail to the back of my hind paws, then up my legs, lifting my fur as it spanned my shoulders. A large yawn topped it all off. I was now ready to begin my day and review my empire. Absently looking around, I completed my evening paw lick routine. The room was only just beginning to darken with the sunset. My human wouldn't wake for hours later. She was a giant bundle of blue blankets and white pillows, half buried into our cozy, bouncy mattress. It was probably the best mattress in the world. The only mattress which could compete was, in fact, the stomach of my human. I would personally bet at least 4 mice on it. If only humans could understand the value of 4 mice, or even the concept of currency. The swooshing blue curtains and the sturdy grilled window drew my attention again. Curious scents filled my very sharp nose. I could smell the neighbor's smelly dog, the subtle mist in the air, and some cooking. Something brown and bitter, like coffee. Sniff, 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 sniff. The window was a world of its own which kept me entertained for hours. Since my human pet wasn't quite up to the task yet, looking out of the window, the first thing one would see was the backyard of ample size. Right in the middle of the yard was a little tree. It was only big enough for me, the lord of the yard. My human was quite fond of growing lemongrass, and I was quite fond of chewing on it. I was not quite as fond of the marigold flowers. The two lined up under our fence, marking out my territory. Anyone walking in here would instantly know by my scent that this yard had already been claimed. My scent was quite fearsome, even if I do say so myself. No one had dared to challenge me yet. Something moved under my tree. Curious. How curious. It looked like a little bird. It chirped like a little bird, but you could never be sure. I leaned out of the window as far as I could, as my tail waved in excitement. Oh, how very curious. The brown little bird was hard to see, but I could hear it chirping quite well. My ears strained, and I couldn't help a slight quiver of curiosity. The tiny bird had a bright yellow beak, and it hopped around within the branches of my tree. I hopped from a paw to another in excitement, but the bird simply kept hopping back and forth. Feeling lazy once again, I curled up at the window as the bird pecked on the wood, then investigated a line of ants crawling up the branches. The sudden sound of blankets being shifted grabbed my attention. Curious. How very curious. My human had turned over in her sleep, but you could never be sure. I was so filled with curiosity that I went over to investigate. Sniff, 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 sniff. My human smelled quite normal. A little sweaty, perhaps. Was she feeling warm in her blue blanket? Was that why she stuck her leg out of the side? Curious. How curious. I sniffed the blanket. Then I sniffed the pillows. The pillows smelled like my human's breath. And my human's breath never really smelled nice. Sniff, 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 sniff. I sniffed my human's hair, then I sniffed my human's face. I sniffed around her face until she opened her eyes. I sank into the warm pillows, making her pet me until I felt like giving her nose a small bite. Eventually, the human got out of bed to do her job, prepare my food. She always forgot where the kitchen was without my guidance. She was rather ill-trained, constantly forgetting how to serve me, her empress, unless I kept an eye on her. But I had no patience to follow her around on this fine day. The sun was setting, and I had territory to inspect. I sat in the dimming living room and licked myself clean to prepare for it. I paid extra attention to my paws and claws, for they were growing sharp once again. I could be deadlier than the average house cat. Any human who touched my immaculate gray fur without greeting me with a sniff first would know. To drive my point across, I sharpened my nails against the cushion of my human's favorite chair. But by then, I had begun to feel quite drowsy and lazy once more. The window in the bedroom called to me once again. The sun was shining directly on the windowsill, and it had become warm and cozy. I enjoyed the warmth greatly. It was as good a day as any to sunbathe and steal a nap. So I curled up at the window seat and tucked my tail in neatly. One ear perked up when I heard the little brown bird still chirping outside. But for the most part, I was in the lovely space between sleep and wakefulness. Pit, pat, pit, pat, pit, pat. How very curious. That wasn't me. So who was it? Pit, pat, pit, pat, pit, pat. I was so very filled with curiosity that I opened my eyes, immediately peering out of the window. I saw black ears and a long black tail. I saw a slobbering tongue. It was a big dog, all by himself. Curious, how curious. My body went utterly still as I watched the dog. The dog sniffed the fence. The dog sniffed the pavement. He was sniffing out my immaculate territory. His tail flicked a couple times, and something startled him and he waddled away. I never saw him after that. I was sore from having stayed curled up for such a long while. A stretch bubbled through me as I loosened up. My human was sitting at her desk. She seemed rather interested in her boring work. How curious. I thought I'd jump up to have a look. The top of her desk was cluttered. My paws had to be placed very carefully around the scattered pencils. My human had a pencil in hand and was doing something. I watched the pencil form smooth lines on the paper. The slight friction between the graphite and the paper was too subtle for my human to hear, but I enjoyed the rhythm. Sniff, 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 sniff. There was a cup next to the pencils. It was filled with some brown liquid. Curious, I went over to smell the contents of the cup. The contents were ginger tea. How boring. Was there nothing to interest a cat so great as myself? A buzz had come in from around the corner, but you could never be sure. My ears focused in the direction it had come from. Buzz, buzz. There it was again. Curious. How curious. I jumped off the table in a neat arc. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I was so curious that my body was just quivering in excitement. I paused around the corner, then jumped out to see what the source of the buzz was. It was a tiny bee on the wooden floor. When had it flown in? The bee was a pretty shade of brown and yellow. Its wings were in good shape, which meant it could fly. Perhaps it was just lost. My excitement peaked as I pawed the bee, but it was too quick for me. It flew off and came to rest on the wall, right out of my reach. I meowed at it, but it didn't move. Curious, how curious. A jump was slowly building itself up in my body. I felt it stiff in my legs and my back, and the next thing I knew was that I had caught the bee in my mouth. It didn't taste quite as delicious as it looked, so I let it down on the floor. Sniff, sniff, sniff. It wasn't escaping anymore, but you could never be sure. How curious. A breeze ran through my fur and the window caught my attention. I walked over to it lazily, knowing there was no rush. The sun had set, turning the sky into a blend of blue, purple, and pink. I sat by the windowsill and looked for the little brown bird. Yes, it was still there in the tree. Maybe it was going to live there for a while. If so, I would need to go over and discuss the terms of stay. But what if the bird was too noisy in the morning? Then I might eat it. It was quite a curious bird, but you could never be sure. The pink began to ebb from the sky, and wakefulness began to ebb from my eyelids. I found myself growing drowsy as I looked out onto my peaceful territory. It was quite calm outside, and the welcoming cool breeze was back once more. The ambient sounds of the life outside were an additional comfort. The cool, gentle breeze of the evening was what lulled me to sleep. Good night, Sweet dreams.